What is a god? All-powerful, all-knowing, immortal. Or so we thought. I was there. I was there the day we learned that even the gods may die. Once again, I stand in front of the mouth of this cave, staring into the abyss that spreads down its gullet. I take in lungfuls of air through my scorched gills. My beak is busted. My hooves are cracked, and my tentacles are wet with familiar blood. Around me, everything is dead and ruined. There are no plants, no Gelthians, no nature. Even the air stands still, and I feel like choking on my every breath. All I am surrounded by are the ruins of Gelthia's past. Cyclopean towers that scrape the sky itself now lay half-collapsed and hollow, like skeletons that have been picked clean by scavengers and bleached white by the sun. I hate the sight of the world around me, and I dread what is in the cave even more. But I move forward into the gaping maw of the cave regardless. I step past the last ray of light that creeps on the cave's floor, and light a torch I didn't even realize was in my hand. The flame licks the walls of the ancient cave, and it illuminates the gaping cracks in its concrete walls, the twisted rebar that juts out from them, the loose and severed cables, the long shuttered glass that crunches beneath my shoes. I have been there before, more times than I can count. I know every twist, every turn, every step on the way to the central chamber where my ancestors once gathered. With every meter going forward, I feel the weight of the dirt and the ancient stone grow heavier and heavier above my head. I feel the air grow stiffer, and even the light of my torch grow more and more faint. With every step, my hearts beat faster and faster, and the gills on my neck flare. Every fiber of my being compels me to turn back to the light, the fresh air, and the familiar safety of the outside world. Yet like every other time I have been there, I cannot resist pushing further into the darkness. I stepped through the frame of what centuries ago had been a door and found myself in the vast and empty rotunda. The corridors I had been making my way through were claustrophobic, but the massive size and starkness of the room I have just stepped into feels 1,000 times worse. It makes me feel oppressed and minuscule, yet I keep going forward, like I have done countless times before, until I find myself in front of an ancient mural, the thing that had pulled me in the depths of that cave time and time again. It's a painting of them, their arrival on our world, Gelthia, the Vari Gia Oth, the star gods, beings of radiant light, all-knowing, all-powerful, immortal. The light of my torch bounces against the mural, giving life to its every detail and every color. The mural showed them coming to us from beyond the sea of stars, riding on beasts made of metal that breathed fire and thunder. In the mural, the night sky turned as bright as day, as their beasts streaked across its firmament. Looking further down the wall, I see their figures, painted in gold and silver, commanding the very heavens above to rain pure light upon our cities. From great towers, built with iron and stone that reached out to scrape the very clouds, they were turned to piles of smoldering green glass. The star gods turned mountains to rubble. They boiled the seas and turned forests to deserts. Our planet was theirs to shape and to mold, as if it was wet clay between the fingers of a sculptor. The fresco is magnificent to behold, each brushstroke a masterpiece of its own, and yet there is something else that draws my attention, something in the corner, barely visible and almost completely faded away. All I can see is the faint outline of dark figures, waiting just outside of the fresco's frame. Just glancing in their direction gives me a feeling like I'm drowning in a pit of mud. Still, I can't help myself but walk closer to them. I need to see that part of the painting. With every step I make, the light of my torch grows dimmer. It's like the painting has a will of its own, and it despises being seen. It swallows all light that touches, a vortex that drowns everything within its reach, and I'm unable to resist its pull. Step by step, I feel like I'm sinking deeper and deeper. I raise my hand to touch the wall and, "Wake up!" I heard Wadriel's voice echo in the room. Slowly, the mural faded from the wall. Then the wall itself collapsed into the ashes of non-existence, and reality replaced it. I opened my eyes, and instead of the ancient hall, I found myself in the mine I had called home for the last 4 years of my life. The familiar flicking flame of the lantern mounted in a small soot-filled alcove cast a faint light in Wadriel's face. giving the impression that he had emerged from the dream along with me. "It's time we leave. Our people are on watch." I nodded without saying a word and started gathering the gear I had packed. "You saw your dream again?" Wadriel asked me. I nodded again. "I saw my dream too," he continued. "I was there again. In Tegrafal Square, amidst a roaring sea of screaming Gelthians, their voices coalesced into an indecipherable wall of noise that was only characterized by hatred and fury. The statue of the Holy Descent cast a shadow over us, and I could feel the eyes of the first star god stare down on me, like they were trying to peer into my very soul. I felt small in its presence, like I was about to be crushed under tons of marble and gold. That was when I heard the voice of the Inquisitor, booming across 100 voice casters. He called for the heretic to be brought forth, and suddenly the voices of 20,000 raving fanatics fell silent all at once. I could hear every step the heretic takes on the executioner's scaffold. I could even hear the whizzing in his throat as he tried to take a breath through swollen and beat-up gills. I almost didn't recognize him for a second. He was a cruel mockery of what he was. Bruised skin hung loosely over bones that had been broken and mended wrong. Scorch marks left where white-hot iron was pressed against him, and 2 blood-crusted and empty sockets were where his eyes used to be. A fitting punishment for a heretic, right? I saw him take his place in the pyre the executioner had built just for him, and right before the headsman's torch fell in the kindling at my father's feet, I saw him look at me with those hollow eye sockets. "Summon the Terrans!" he commanded me. Then he was consumed by fire. The crowd came back to life, and I woke up with my heart threatening to beat out of my chest. Wadriel paused for a moment. "It's kind of funny. It doesn't feel like a dream. It feels more vivid than any true memory I have. I was still an egg waiting to hatch when my father was executed. I've never seen the statue of the first star god from up close. I've never even been in Tegrafal Square." Wadriel had told me of his reoccurring dream before. It was how we met, how he recruited me into the Remembrancers, a group, an order, as he introduced them to me, that shared this kind of reoccurring dream. We all called them dreams, but in reality, they were more like visions. We saw them every time we closed our eyes, and they lingered in the backs of our minds every moment we had them open. "I hate this," Wadriel said. "This feeling I get every time I see it. It's the feeling of knowing you have to do something, but not knowing exactly what. It gnaws at you after a while." I knew what he meant. I hated that feeling too, like a fading memory that always slipped through the tentacles. We remembered that we should follow our visions, but we didn't remember how or why. That's how the Remembrancers first came to be, Wadriel had told me, to help each other remember, to help each other figure out what we needed to do, to scratch this itch that always stayed an inch beyond our grasp. I ducked out of the small entryway to the bunk room where I slept, and into the corridors that snaked through the mine and connected the various mining shafts, living areas, and the myriad small temples together. The walls where the soil was solid enough for nails to stick to were covered with religious iconography. The descending star, the emblem of the star gods, was found on every couple of meters of wall in that mine, and the space between the emblems was devoted to etchings and paintings of excerpts from the Taifir Achum, the word from above. A particular passage, "Toil for those above and find joy down below," was especially common. I never really liked that one. It always stirred something foul in me. A distinct and inexplicable distaste for those words filled up within me every time I saw them written out. There was something about that message that I disagreed with on a fundamental level. The clergy says that the gods liberated us from our ignorance. They took away our sinful creation that fueled our hubris and blessed us with the gift of piety and submission. They showed us our place in the dirt so that we could appreciate the glory of the stars. Back then, I still wondered if maybe I would understand the wisdom of their preaching, but all I could think of was that at least back when we created those sinful creations, we toiled for ourselves. At least when we worked our fingers to the literal bone, we didn't do it to pay a tithe to gods that stay in their forbidden cities, in their white mountains. At least when our young hatched back then, we didn't offer a tenth of their number to them, never to see them again. Mikhail and I passed by a pair of overseers that prowled the corridors, looking for workers that should be toiling for those above and were slacking off instead. The still wet blood on the ends of their whips betrayed that they had already found some not too long ago. Thankfully, we crossed them without them checking our passes. The passes may have borne the true seal of the head overseer, a seal that was obtained in exchange for a handful of silver coins given under the table. But I was still grateful for any avoided encounter with an overseer. The scars on my back ached whenever I saw their scroll-engraved masks that acted as their badges of office. Finally, we made it to the water-powered elevator and grabbed a gondola to the surface. Then Wadriel decided it was safe enough to be chatty again. "This person, Mikhail, do you think he's one of us, or is he just another lunatic trying to get killed by entering the City of Glass?" Wadriel asked me, as if he didn't just wait for an excuse to say his own opinion. He said he had visions, repeated dreams of his entrance to the city that ate at him more and more with each passing night. He says that only when he began to journey towards the city did he feel calm again. That's how he knew he needed to go there. I replied. Yeah. I know. I've read the letter too. He could just be a scavenger, though, trying to grab any ancient artifacts from the city's ruins, and when he got caught, he spun a tale of dreams and visions so that the Watchers would think he's insane and release him in some gutter instead of locking him up. Wadriel explained his theory, as it was obvious he would. The remembrancers at the well think his story is true. That's what matters right now, I replied, as the elevator reached the surface and the orange light of the setting sun hit our eyes. I almost smiled at the sight before the scent of charred flesh assaulted my gills. More burned heretics. Too many for the good of the clergy itself. They tortured and burned them, hoping to put the fear of the star gods in those that strayed from their teachings. But every corpse turned to charcoal served only as another tally of defiance against them, more than anything else. Heresy, blasphemy, criminality of all sorts. It felt like the whole world was in a churn those days, like the people could sense a coming change in their very guts. Come to think of it, perhaps they could. I took my first steps outside, and the thought that I couldn't even remember the last time I had set foot out of the mines struck me. My dreams compelled me to act, but never specified what action to take, so the only way I had to combat the sense of ever-present stress was to throw myself into my work head first. When my tentacles were blistered and bleeding on the shaft of the pickaxe, it hurt, but at least I had reprieve from the incessant need to go somewhere I didn't even know. Every moment I didn't work felt like torture. This time, however, it felt different. This time it felt right, like I was finally doing what I was supposed to do. That was all the confirmation I needed that Mikhail was telling the truth. The air outside of the mine felt fresh and humid. I could sense the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon already, the same horizon we were heading to. It was a long walk to the prison where Mikhail was held, but knowing I would be getting even a step closer to following the vision that had been residing within my mind for all this time was all the motivation I needed. A few hours later, and the storm clouds that threatened to pour rain upon us had made good on their promise. Mud now covered my legs to the knee by the time we could finally see the watchtowers of the prison glisten in the dim moonlight that managed to break through the cover of clouds. Wadriel had arranged for the guards to leave open the steel bars that secured the spillway where the prisoners' sewers were emptying in the nearby river, but the storm had swollen the river, raising its level above the spillway. We would have to dive into the ice-cold water in order to reach our target. We started taking off our outer cloaks when I heard thunder crash above our heads and a blinding light from the heavens engulfed us, and the prison before the night turned dark again. For a moment, I thought I was dead, struck by lightning. It was Wadriel's bewildered look that snapped me out of it. We both looked to the sky where the deafening sound and blinding light had come from. That was when we saw one of their beasts descending in the courtyard of the prison. I had seen them on that mural from my dreams, but the painting didn't do them justice. The beast's metal body glistened, as if made by the purest of silvers, and was larger than most houses I had seen. Fire emerged, full of anger from its 4 mouths, and poured into the courtyard below. In an instant, it spun around, revealing 2 red glowing eyes that cast beams of light wherever they looked, a predator, scanning for any signs of prey. I was still mesmerized by the sight when I felt Wadriel pull me by my cloak and into the freezing river, taking me with him below its surface. When I saw the beast's red glare bathing the water above me in its light, I knew Wadriel had just saved my life. Without missing a moment, he pointed me to the spillway, and we started to swim towards it. We swam in the freezing water and through the murk until we finally got past the spillway and in the cistern that lay beneath the prison. Wadriel emerged from the water first, and I came after him. It took all the strength I had left in me to drag myself and my soaking wet cloak up. By the time my body stopped shaking from the exhaustion and the shock, Wadriel had already started a fire from the trash that gathered against the cistern's banks. Those that took arms up against them were cut down like grain ready for the harvest. The arms that tried to harm them were turned to dust, and the tentacles that held them wilted and fell off like ripe fruit falls from the tree that has borne them. Wadriel said he was reciting a passage from the Word from above in his previous life, before his dream started and before he became a member of the Remembrancers. He was a member of the clergy. He must have recited those passages 1,000 times over when he gave his sermons. We must wait until they leave. To even look upon a star god is the doom of those without a pure soul. He paused to make a point of looking me up and down. Do you think your soul is pure enough? He asked me. So we waited. We waited and we listened to the sounds that bounced through the sewage pipes that led to the cistern. Garbled and distorted from the echo, we heard the voices of Gelthians pleading with profound desperation. We heard prayers to the star gods be cut short, and we heard Gelthians screaming, agonized screams that turned blood into ice. Then the smell came, flowing down the same pipes. It was a familiar smell, the smell of flesh being engulfed by flames and roasted away. We didn't spend more than a few moments there, yet it felt like entire days amidst the cries of pain and desperation and the smell of torched skin. We waited until we heard the roar of the star god's beast again. We waited until we heard the roar grow more and more faint as the beast went further away. We waited until only the sounds of pain lingered above, and then we waited some more, until even those were silenced. When we eventually made our way out of the cistern through the grates that run across the length of the prison's basement, we saw the horror, a more real and more profound horror than anything we had witnessed before. The smell of incinerated flesh and boiled blood was several times stronger than it was in the cistern, overpowering all other senses except that of sight. The walls of the cells were black with soot, the bars of the cells were still glowing red, and the floor was filled with broken and blackened corpses. Their faces, those that still had a face at least, were contorted in the agony that marked their last living moments. The world was silent as we walked through the sea of death. We ourselves moved like reanimated corpses, every thought blocked, other than that of our purpose there. We had to find Mikael, make him lead us to his passage in the city of glass, to help us fulfill the visions that plagued us. We shifted through the corridors, through the cells, through every mangled remain until the silence was broken by the whisper of a cry, coming from the isolation cells. We made our way there, following the faint sound until we found the Gelthian that was making it. The heavy iron door that once stood in front of the cell now lay discarded on the ground, half turned to slug and half turned to rust. In a corner, we saw him, Mikael in a pool of his own blood. His face, where flesh still clung to it, was burnt red and blistered, and his eyes had melted out of their sockets, yet his beak still moved, and what was stranger still, they were curled in an expression of bliss instead of suffering. We moved closer, and we realized that what we had heard wasn't a cry, it was a faint laugh. Mikael was laughing. They will come. The Terrans will come, and your world will burn. He said more faintly than the faintest of whispers, and his last breath escaped his lungs. Above him, where the wall wasn't covered in scorch marks, we saw the drawings. An elaborate map to the city of glass covered the cell from wall to wall, and from the ceiling to the floor. We both studied the drawings until I finally noticed something. Where did you say he was caught? I asked Wadriel. On the eastern passage to the city, parallel to the Red Road, he answered. This map, I tapped on the wall. This map shows an entrance from the west, I said as I dug through my satchel until I finally found a piece of charcoal and some paper. The eastern passage is heavily patrolled. The western passage is almost abandoned because it's cursed by the star gods. It's impossible to enter the city alive through there. Anyone that attempts to travel it dies, puking and bleeding from every place blood can emerge from. But this map shows an underground passage. Perhaps that passage is safe. Perhaps it has been spared from the curse. I remarked between drawing on paper, recreating the map that was all over the cell's walls. Wadriel took a step back. He wanted to be caught. His dreams told him to be caught, to make this, for us, he concluded. Finish drawing, and make sure you get it right. It's time we visited the well. It was a 3 days walk from the prison to Zaftaleia, the blessed city, where our chapter house was located. I had only visited once before, but it didn't take me long to understand where its name stemmed from. The well, the hollowed chapter house of the Remembrancers, was an abandoned cistern in a part of the Zaftaleia sewer that had gone out of use decades ago when it was replaced by newer infrastructure. It felt and it smelt exactly how one would expect an abandoned sewer to feel and smell like, damp and old, and with the scent of centuries of sewage still lingering on the stones. Bookshelves, workstations, bedding, and a cooking area with an open spit marked this hall as a living space. It was here where the rest of the Remembrancers gathered. The faces around me were unfamiliar. I had been a part of this society for years, yet the only other Remembrancer I knew was Wadriel. The things we were investigating, the things we were doing to follow the dreams that infiltrated our subconscious, were considered blasphemy by the clergy, and as it seemed, even the star gods themselves were opposed to us. So we had to be careful. We had to follow rules. One of them was to only work in pairs. The less we knew about each other, the safer all of us were. Wadriel led me through the cistern chapter house combo to an old maintenance storeroom turned office, where the Order's Grand Master was. The office was once spacious enough for heavy cleaning and mechanical maintenance equipment to be stored, but now it was crammed to nearly the point of intolerability with shelves, old chests, and scattered books, the pages on some of which slipped through their decaying covers and spilled all over the floor. On the ceiling, there was an ancient chandelier that dated from well before the arrival of the star gods, illuminating the room in the otherworldly glow. There were no strings and pulleys to bring it up and down for the lighting of the candles, because it quite simply didn't require any candles to produce its light. Instead, it produced illumination from 8 small orbs of orange glass that burned without heat. How it worked was beyond anyone's understanding, and its existence alone was enough to condemn everyone in the well to death in the pyre. I was still looking at the chandelier, like a child seeing fireworks for the first time, when I heard the rusty click of the lock behind. Wadriel had led me here to trap me, was my very first thought. Perhaps I had seen too much, or heard or thought too much, and now the Remembrancers wanted me dead, being part of a secret society. Hiding beneath the sewers, masking your every move, does tend to increase your level of paranoia after all. Do you know where your dreams come from? Instead of a dagger at my throat, I was met with a voice of the Gelthian sitting where the arcane light of the chandelier couldn't reach him. Nobody does, I replied to the umbral figure. We used to be more. Before the gods arrived, we used to reach for the stars ourselves before our tentacles were cut, the figure said as he stepped into the light. You don't know me, but I know you. I'm the one that has been coordinating you, Wadriel, and the rest. You're the Grandmaster, I replied. Some call me that, he answered, though I despise the term. I'm nobody's master. He paused for a moment, looking at me, as if trying to dig through my brain to see if I was worthy of his trust. Come on, he finally said, gesturing for me to follow him. We went through a narrow passage between 2 bookshelves and found ourselves on top of a winding metal staircase lit by a series of torches along the stairs, and snaking between the torches were masses of cables like those I had seen in my dreams. The walls surrounding us were also made out of concrete instead of stone. It didn't take me long to realize this section of the sewers was older than the rest by a few hundred or maybe even 1,000 years. It predated the descent of the star gods. At the bottom was a vault door made out of a huge slab of iron and resting on 4 hinges bigger than my torso. The Grand Master took a key out of his cloak, slid it into the lock, and the door opened up by itself, though again there was no system of ropes and pulleys anywhere to be seen. Beyond the door was a device I can hardly even begin to describe. Myriad of cables seemed to sprout from it like weeds, clinging on the ceiling and sprawling on the floor beneath our feet. "It's long been dormant. Now it's simply an elaborate art piece, but our ancestors called it the Dreamcaster," the Grandmaster said as he motioned at the intricate device. "There was a time when we sought to find life from beyond the sea of stars, a time before life came and found us instead," he said with a sigh. "We used this device, and others like it, to reach out to them, whoever would listen. We found that where language may pose limitations, the subconscious of any intelligent species can be affected to a similar degree by something called a quantum wave. The message carried by these waves wasn't always coherent, was often fragmented among multiple recipients, and it proved almost impossible to direct it to a single individual. But it could be received and interpreted by anyone across the sea of stars. The message carried by these waves was a dream, like the ones you've been seeing, like the ones all of us here have been seeing and been guided by." "So our dreams. Someone else has been sending them to us. Another group with a device like this one?" I asked. "Another species from beyond the sea of stars," Bor-Vial answered. "The Terrans. They have been sending us messages for centuries now. There are accounts of Gelthians having dreams like ours for hundreds of years, all over Gelthia, and we have finally, after all this time, been able to interpret them." "What do they want?" I asked, even though a part deep inside of me already knew. They wanted to come here, to finish what they had started all those millennia ago, to hunt down the star gods and kill them. As if reading my mind, or more likely, as if we were sharing the same thought, the Grandmaster simply nodded at me. "I wanted you to know what we were really doing here. I wanted you to have a chance to go back if you want," he said. I thought of all the burned heretics tied to stakes. I thought of the overseers massacring entire villages to find a single blasphemer. I thought of all the lashings I myself had received. I thought of all the atrocities committed in the name of those that came from the stars. I thought of my only son, that I was forced to give as an offering to the star gods. I didn't need to think any longer. "Good," Bor-Vial spoke, seeing the answer written in my eyes before I could even utter a word. "With the map, we have all the pieces we need to call the Terrans. We will head out in a fortnight." From afar, the city of glass looked more like a geological formation than an actual city. What once were buildings now looked like enormous stone pillars or natural obelisks that reached for the sky like 1,000 outstretched tentacles begging for the salvation of the heavens. The sun shone through the gaps between them, stretching their shadows for kilometers on end, until they reached where we were. 5 of us stood there, those of whose dreams pointed them within the city, those that had a role to play in the final moments before we changed the world forever. Wadriel, whose purpose was to summon the Terrans. Fajrial, whose purpose was to enter a number sequence into an ancient machine. Dorvel, who had the reoccurring dream of lighting a fire hot enough to burn the wings of an angel. The Grand Master, who saw what came after. And myself, who was to guide us to the ancient cave. We followed the map Mikael had given us before he died, taking care to be as unnoticeable as possible. We traveled only at the cover of night, never lighting a fire or a torch, even after we had passed through the last settled village and into the no-man's land that surrounded the city. No villages, no Gelthian traders, not even nature dared trespass here. All there was a barren ring of black soil, emptiness and scattered ruins that stretched into the horizon and marked the perimeter of the city. "There," Fajrial said, "the entrance to the underground passage." Indeed, the markings on the map matched what we were staring at, a black hole in the ground surrounded by crumbling buildings built by our ancestors, whose purpose had long been consigned to oblivion. We marched into the murky depths of the hole and into a tunnel where we finally felt safe enough to light our torches. In their dim light, we saw marvels of our past no Gelthian had seen for countless generations. The ceiling was lined with glass that looked similar to the glass on the Grand Master's chandelier, albeit these ones had lost their heatless flame a long time ago. Between them were blades encased in metallic drums with holes on either end. Strings of metal hung loosely between them, connecting them to each other. The walls of the tunnel resembled the walls of the cave in my dream, as they too were marked by fissures in the concrete. Something within me, however, knew that this wasn't the same place. I still had a journey before me. Scattered around us were the metallic skeletons of ancient beasts. They bore a small resemblance to the beasts the star gods rode, but were tiny in comparison and far less intimidating. They even felt familiar in a way, as if these beasts were made to be ridden by Gelthians and not star gods. When we emerged from the tunnel, we saw why they called it the City of Glass. The ground was paved with a layer of green glass-like substance that cracked at our every step. Giant piles of melted and fused glass stood where buildings once were. They looked like enormous Phtharan mounts, ready to burst open, and for millions of those infernal insects to emerge from them. The thought alone filled me with unease, yet they stood dormant as we walked between them. The sense of unease remained with me all the same, though. I knew that I was walking on forbidden ground, that my every breath there was an act of blasphemy worthy of death. A death that I could sense was coming. Any building that wasn't turned to glass was a cenotaph of metal and stone, hollow and looming over us like we were nothing more than insects. Between the glass mounts and the hollowed buildings of Gelthia's past was a hill. Cyclopean metallic structures adorned its crest. "The map ends here," Dorval said, looking up from the copy she held in her tentacles. "Where now?" She asked the Grand Master, but before she could answer, I stepped in. "I know where we must go," I said. I could feel something guiding me, pulling me towards the hill in the center of the city, and to the cave that was at its top. The pull from my dreams was now present in my real life too. I was getting close. The end was getting close. We were at the foot of the hill when Dorval noticed it, a winged shadow in the moonlight. Before she could say or do anything about it, the creature from the sky was already diving on our position. With a screech, and in the blink of an eye, it had grabbed Fajrial in its iron talons and was taking him to the sky with it. His screams faded away as the creature gained altitude, and for a moment, there was silence. The silence only lasted for a second before the screams came back, getting louder and louder. We saw him drop from the sky, his entrails following as he descended, before he crashed on one of the shorter piles of green glass, cracking it on impact. The sound of the creature's screech came next. We pulled out our crossbows ready to shoot it. When it came into sight, the four of us that remained let loose upon it, yet every single one of our bolts missed entirely. As I struggled to load another bolt into my crossbow, I heard a crash and the squelching sound of flesh and bone being crushed behind me. I turned around to face it. At the creature's feet, I saw the shattered corpse of Wadrial. I froze at the sight, my arms and legs unable to move, like they were made out of rusted iron. In the moonlight, as it glared at me, I saw it, a creature that was a mockery of the Gelthian form. The creature had the body and head of Gelthian, but the body was distorted with rippling and abnormally large musculature that tore through the skin that should be covering it, exposing the red tissue to the air. Metal wires snaked across its head and metal plates dug into it, yet beneath all that was the face of a small Gelthian boy, not even a juvenile yet. That was when I realized what I was looking at, an angel. An abominable creature, the result of the amalgamation of a Gelthian child that had been offered as a sacrifice to the star gods. Along with their arcane mechanical constructs, the angel's limbs were made of iron and wire and merged with the flesh in an obscene way, like tumors bursting out of sickly skin. 2 giant black iron wings emerged from its back, each of its feathers ending in a razor-sharp tip. I saw one of the angel's taloned arms rise over me when a bolt struck the angel in the back of the head. The creature turned around and lunged at Dorval, who had loosed the bolt. She was standing on top of a metal beast skeleton. When the angel came upon her, she dropped her torch in a hole in the skeleton. With a single swipe of his wings, the angel cleaved Dorval clean in half, severing her in the waist, but it was already too late. The beast's skeleton exploded with deafening force underneath the angel's feet, consuming the creature in flames. It screeched and it thrashed maniacally as the fire burned it. Then the screeching stopped, and only the screaming of a young Gelthian boy remained. That too stopped when the angel dropped to the ground, its wings melting into pools of liquid iron. With the screeching and the screaming gone, A light groan could be heard coming from the pile of glass Fajerial had landed on. The Grand Master and I ran towards it, climbing at its top. There we saw Fajrial, still clinging to life, though not for long. With all the strength he had left, he pointed to his chest before finally letting go and taking his last breath. Above the gaping wound from where the angel had disemboweled him was a sequence of numbers drawn in blood. The numbers he had been seeing in his dreams. Even with his last action, he helped us. Alas, we didn't have any time to mourn him, fearing more angels would come. We made a run for the top of the hill. There, amidst the rubble and the rusted metal structures, was the entrance to the cave I had dreamt of. On top of it, I could see an emblem of a constellation of stars, and in ancient Gelthian writing, I saw the words, Center for Stellar Observation. I was ready to step in when the Grand Master stopped me. I turned to him to see him covered in blood from the chest down. In the chaos of the encounter with the angel, a piece of shrapnel had hit him.
I had hoped I would get to see it with my own eyes, but I guess dreams will do,
he said as he collapsed to his knees.
My dream,
he whispered,
is that even gods may die.
He spoke one final time, and he handed me an ancient key with the same emblem as the one that stood above the cave's entrance. The cave was just the way I had dreamt it, broken glass beneath my feet, loose severed wires, and cracked concrete, and at its end, a great hall with a mural covering its walls. I saw the mural. I ran my fingers across its surface, and I walked to its familiar dark corner. My torch grew dimmer the closer I got, just like in my dreams, as if something was swallowing its very light until it finally snuffed altogether. Instead of darkness, however, I saw the figures that resided in the shadow. I saw the Terrans, beings dressed in black and cloaked in shadow. I saw them in the mural, hold an entire planet in their grasp and cracking it apart between their fingers. Countless of the star gods' beasts emerged from the broken planet, spilling in the sea beyond the stars. I realized then the star gods, our masters, were nothing more than prey, and those beings in the shadow, the Terrans, were predators. I sat there, in the darkness in front of the mural, contemplating what I should do.
Even the gods may die,
I heard the Grand Master's voice echo in the black. Slowly, I stood up and lit my torch again. I moved with a certainty I didn't know I could possess, and walked through the adjacent room labeled Signal Center. Inside, I saw a console that pulsated with light. Somehow, the ancient technology of my ancestors still powered it. I slid the key of my Grand Master in the slot on top of the console and turned it like opening the key to a lock. In the numbers board, I pressed the numbers I had seen drawn on Fajrial's chest. I stood for a final moment before the end, before I brought my dream to reality and changed the world. I pressed a button labeled Begin Transmission, and I stood back. As the light buzzing started being heard from inside the walls, I don't know how long I spent in the room, staring at the flickering screens that I didn't even know the purpose of. When I found myself outside again, it was dawn, and a swarm of the star gods' metal beasts hovered in the air, flames shooting from their mouths. Light flashed before my eyes, blinding me and bringing me to my knees. Bathed in that light, I saw a being of radiant power emerge. At its very sight, I felt the fabric of my sanity unwind. In a booming voice that hurt my ears, I heard the words filled with desperation in a way that I believed was impossible for such a being.
"What have you done?"
the star god said, its voice almost cracking at the end. Suddenly, I saw all color be drained from the sky above, the black and the flickering stars that lingered in the moments before that sun revealed itself, the orange that painted the eastern horizon, and the light blue that stood at the border between them were all gone, swallowed into nothingness. From the non-existence that had eaten the heavens, I saw it emerge. A beast, a dragon that dwarfed those of the star gods. As suddenly as the sky was taken away, it came back, and as the colors returned, a shock wave that cracked like 1,000 volcanoes erupting at once came from where reality had stopped existing. The boom shattered the green glass beneath me and caused the glass mounts to erupt in infinite pieces, instinctively making me close my eyes. When I opened them again, I saw more than half of the beasts of the star gods drop from the sky bathed in fire. The rest were fleeing away from the metal dragon that had emerged out of the nothing, but those two, one by one, were set aflame and exploded when the Terran dragon loosed bolts of light upon them. The star god looked to the sky, and even though I could not make sense of his face, I knew that what he was feeling was nothing short of absolute horror. I saw him take a step back and produce a small device from his waist. He turned it to his head, and in the same moment, he had dropped dead. What kind of being could hold such power? The power to kill gods just by virtue of existing. Amidst the blood of a god pooling at my feet, and beneath the burning carcasses of the star beasts painting the heavens in flame, I heard the voice of a Terran. "This is the INS Lightbringer. The Imperium of Terra has come for you. Be not afraid."